Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, September 27th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about Pennsylvania's governor's race. Now, I know we spend a lot of time talking about Pennsylvania, but this honestly might be one of the final videos we actually make about Pennsylvania's governor election. Now, the reason why that might be is because of a lot of new data that is coming out of the state from Marist College, Insider Advantage, Morning Call, Trafalgar, etc., all of which indicating that Josh Shapiro, the Democratic candidate for governor, is on track for a pretty solid election. In addition to that, we have polls from Emerson College and CBS News, and in all of the polls we have seen, except for two of them, they are all double-digit victories for Josh Shapiro, translating to a Shapiro +9 overall average. Now, this is a sudden uptick in support for Josh Shapiro that had not been seen previously. A lot of the data that we have seen from the prior months have shown us in a much more competitive position between Shapiro and Mastriano. Now, this really was earlier on. You found numbers from June that showed Shapiro ahead by just 4 points, another one showing him ahead by just 3 points, Fox News revealing a whopping 10-point decision for Josh Shapiro, but then it narrowed back down with Trafalgar, which showed Josh Shapiro only up by about 4 points. But then the numbers started to become more consistent. Franklin and Marshall released Shapiro +11, CBS News and YouGov released Shapiro +11. Morning Call, Shapiro +11, Marist College, Shapiro +12, Insider Advantage, Shapiro +15. These numbers are substantial, and they are substantial enough that they have significantly driven up Josh Shapiro's average on the overall polling numbers. And this is the first time in a long time that the governor's race seems to be significantly outpacing where the Democrats are on the Senate level. We will be making numerous videos about the Senate race in Pennsylvania and in many other races because, quite frankly, it is competitive. Right now, John Fetterman, the current lieutenant governor of the state, is ahead by 4.5% across the ballot. 4.5% to Dr. Oz. This is a closer race, certainly closer than the governor's race, which on average is decided by 9 points. Looking at some of the numbers that we see, Insider Advantage has Shapiro up by 15, Marist has Shapiro up by 12, while amongst the same groups here, you find that Fetterman only leads in Insider Advantage by 3, Marist College by 7, and Morning Call by 5. A significant underperformance for John Fetterman relative to the Josh Shapiro numbers, but overall, a good spread for the Democratic Party across Pennsylvania. Right now, I will say that John Fetterman is definitely going to be in an extremely close Senate race that needs to be watched. We have been talking about this race for quite some time, but for a longer while, we actually saw that the Senate polls were better for the Democrats than the governor's poll. This is the governor's poll from the early months of June and July, in which Josh Shapiro was at a 9-point lead over Doug Mastriano. Today, that is now double digits has been holding since double digits for about 2 weeks now, since about the middle of September. But you can see that the lead for Shapiro at different points was actually quite narrow, 3 points, then it was 7 points, then it was 8 points, and 9 points, which is substantial, but not actually as substantial as it was for John Fetterman during that exact same time frame. When Shapiro was up by 3, Fetterman was up by 4. When Shapiro was up by 7, Fetterman was up by 8. And for a month on end, John Fetterman maintained about a 10 to 12 point lead over Dr. Oz across the ballot, meaning that John Fetterman was outperforming Josh Shapiro on our numbers. Today, that's reversed. Josh Shapiro is outperforming John Fetterman by about 3 points. And I've been saying for quite a while, this is what we should expect from our race. In no reality did I ever think the governor's race was going to be more competitive than the Senate race, even if the polls had indicated that. Josh Shapiro is fundamentally a stronger candidate. Doug Mastriano is weaker than Dr. Oz, and just because Doug Mastriano had a stronger GOP primary performance really doesn't mean much, because you can nominate the wrong candidate, and that's exactly what the GOP did on both fronts, in the governor and Senate level. But it's much more apparent on our Senate level here. Josh Shapiro being at a 9-point lead also isn't too far out of the question from where Tom Wolf was back in 2014. 2014 was a year in which the Democrats were running against Tom Corbett, who was an extremely unpopular Republican governor who first won his race back in 2010 and won in 2010 by a pretty significant amount. Looking at the numbers, Tom Corbett won by about 9 points across the state, was up by about 8 points in terms of overall polling, but then in 2014 he lost by 10 points across the state. The polls had said that Tom Wolf was going to win by 11. He ended up winning by 10, only off by about a point. You can see here some recognizable names: Morning Call, CBS News, the same ones that are saying that Josh Shapiro is on track for a 12-point victory, 11-point victory, depending on which poll you look at. Overall, they are indicating, the pollsters from 2010 and 2014, that Josh Shapiro is on track for victory. We can take a look back at 2018 as well, even though these races were not really that competitive. But you can see that Morning Call said that Tom Wolf was going to win by about 21 points. He won by about 17. So it was off by about 4 points across the spread. Again, if this one is off by 4 points, what do you find? Josh Shapiro still wins by about 7 points in a year significantly better for the Republican Party than 2018. Looking at the Senate results, you can see Morning Consult said Bob Casey would win by 14. He won by 13. It was off by about a point on the Senate race, and looking at the numbers that they have for the Senate race as well, we can assume, based off of the Morning Call, that John Fetterman wins by 4 and not 5. But overall, the numbers that we see, the pollsters that we have, and the ones that we can and cannot trust seem to be all telling us that the Democrats are ahead, but specifically that the governor's race is even further ahead. Insider Advantage released new numbers that I just want to briefly touch on because they released numbers back in 2020, and they were wrong. But not only were they wrong in a different direction than some of the other pollsters. The overall average was absolutely spot on, said Biden would win by 1.2. He won by 1.2. But Insider Advantage said that Donald Trump would win the state of Pennsylvania by 2 points, and ultimately, he ended up losing. You know who else said that he was going to win? Trafalgar, who is also indicating the closest matchup in both the governor and Senate race that, quite frankly, isn't being reflected in a lot of the other data that we see. So, to take a pollster such as Insider Advantage that gave the Republicans a false victory back in 2020, showing Shapiro ahead by 15 points, I would trust these numbers. I don't think Shapiro wins by 15 points, but a likely margin is certainly not out of the question and is honestly the likeliest outcome, no pun intended. My most recent governor map from the earlier time of September, we found that the state of Pennsylvania had ultimately moved over to finally be a likely Democratic state. For literally months on end, we had treated Pennsylvania as this lean, sometimes tilt Democratic state, depending on the national circumstance, and in different circumstances, a tilt or lean Republican state. When Glenn Youngkin won in the state of Virginia, it showed the national Democrats that they could lose states that Biden won by over 10 points, such as the case with the state of Virginia. Republicans almost won the state of New Jersey. But then came a difference between the November timeframe and now. The issue of Roe v. Wade, the issue of the economy, whatever it might be, things have changed between now and last November, and things have changed dramatically in favor of the Democratic Party. And Pennsylvania in specific has changed quite a way, going from lean red to tilt blue to lean blue, now to likely blue. Pennsylvania has exhibited nearly all of the characterizations that we have thus far. It's only, technically speaking, based off some of these new polls, 4 to 5 points off from being safe. I don't think I'd ever feel comfortable characterizing Pennsylvania's governorship as safe in this type of national environment, but if you take Josh Shapiro, you take Doug Mastriano, and you place them in a 2018 type of environment, Pennsylvania would have been safe 6 months ago. But since we are in a time frame where the Republican Party is expected to outperform their past 3 election performance, 2020, 2018, and 2016, we can expect Pennsylvania to be at least closer than it might otherwise be in a more beneficial year for the Democratic Party. But what these numbers tell us is that the Democrats are getting very close to locking down Pennsylvania entirely to have no chance at a Republican victory within the state. And based off of our expert forecasts too, we have been seeing an outperformance for the governor's race versus the Senate race for quite some time. Even though the polls may not have entirely reflected that during the entirety of the campaign season, you can find that to be true on 538's forecast. For instance, on June 5th, 2022, the Republican Party had a 64% chance at winning the Senate race in the state of Pennsylvania. On that same time frame in the governor's race, the Republicans only had about a 25% chance at winning control of the governorship in the state. The Democrats held strong at 75%. The Senate race, on the other hand, Democrats and Republicans seem to have been flipped. But now the numbers have gotten closer to each other. The Democrats now have a 91% chance at the governorship, and Democrats have an 80% chance at the Senate race. Overall, a pretty good number, a pretty good showing of support for the Democrats in the Senate race, in the governor's race, and altogether, you find that the Democratic Party is on track to win both of these races, but very clearly one more than the other. A 91% chance is reminiscent of what we have seen with previous Democrats who have gone on to win Pennsylvania by some pretty large margins. As we get closer to Election Day, we've seen a clean and consistent upward trend for the Democratic Party as the time has gone on, and as more data gets released that shows these 15-point margins of victory, you're going to get closer to the light model, which only takes into account polls, which I wouldn't say is the most accurate model, but as you get more data that reveals very similar numbers, you start to see how it gets closer. The interesting thing, though, is that the light model actually had the Republicans ahead in the governor's race at one point in time with a 76% chance of victory. Again, goes to show that it isn't entirely accurate, but the numbers did dwindle. They dwindled again, and now the Democrats have nearly a 95% chance of victory. According to Classic, it's down to 94. According to Deluxe, it's down to 91. But overall, a greater than 9 in 10 chance of victory, the Democrats practically have locked up the state of Pennsylvania to a point where the GOP has no viable shot at winning the governor's race there. And a lot of that can be boiled down to the extremism and the candidate quality behind Doug Mastriano. Ultimately, he is not someone that I would say middle of America would necessarily want to vote for, or middle of Pennsylvania America would want to vote for either. Doug Mastriano has been vehemently against any type of democratic counting procedure for the state of Pennsylvania, whether directly or indirectly, has even indicated that he doesn't want to certify, if he is governor, a Biden victory in the state of Pennsylvania in 2024, insinuating that any type of victory for President Biden would have to be fraud. In addition to that, Doug Mastriano has made a bunch of claims and statements, whether pertaining to gay marriage or climate change, or typically any issue that the American public seems to be very much lopsided in one direction on, believing in climate change, believing in marriage equality, believing in a woman's right to choose. These are things that the Republican Party, quite frankly, needs to distance themselves from, but not only have they not distanced themselves from, Doug Mastriano has embraced this level of right-wing extremism that is not an electable version of a Republican candidate, especially in a state where President Biden just defeated Donald Trump in the last election. President Biden's victory was a show of display that the Democratic Party can win in Pennsylvania again. He reversed back the blue wall and won Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. But that didn't mean that these were the most extreme margins, and by no stretch of the imagination were they. But what they were still significant enough to outweigh Donald Trump's vote share, to outweigh the record-breaking turnout amongst Democrats, Republicans, Independents altogether, to find that at the end of the day, the Democrats came out ahead in the state of Pennsylvania. And they very well might this November election. The governor's race is getting closer and closer to an assured victory for the Democrats. When I take a look at the governor prediction, not only on 538, but practically everywhere else that we look at, Pennsylvania is treated in very much as a likely state. We can take a look here. Let's just jump down to the state of Pennsylvania. The Democrats, according to the Race to the White House model as well, have a 93% chance of victory, and the projection is that Democrats win by about 11 points. Looking at the 538 forecast, you find something very similar. The expected margin of victory is to be somewhere around 9 points across the state, significant enough to say that I believe Josh Shapiro is on track for a very commanding victory this November, and that the Republican Party is now out of reach from winning the state of Pennsylvania unless super significant level of circumstances change between now and November. The Democrats are practically guaranteed the governorship yet again in the state of Pennsylvania, largely in part due to the Republican Party's own inability to nominate the strong candidates. We've seen it happen not only in Pennsylvania, but also in Arizona, but also in Georgia, but also in many other parts of this country, where the Republican Party has chosen the nominees that are the least electable version of their party, the most extreme, which thus those who vote in primaries are the most partisan. So yes, they may attract voters through that method of campaigning and style of working their policies, but also there's a flip side to it. Because taking those extremist policies is making it known that you don't support gay marriage, making it known that you don't believe in climate change, making it known that you don't believe that Biden won the election fair and square, when the majority of the nation is on a different side of the issue, when the majority of Pennsylvania is on a different side of the issue. That's when you've officially lost the election by yourself. Josh Shapiro was vulnerable. That is a fact. Josh Shapiro could have lost this governor's race even as a very strong Democrat. But all it took was a good Republican. Not only do the Republicans not have a good Republican, they have someone who is actively being detrimental to their chances in down ballot races, in the Senate race, House races, state legislative races, whatever it might be. Doug Mastriano is weighing down the GOP. And we will find on Election Day, when Josh Shapiro wins this governorship by a pretty impressive margin, or wins it regardless. A victory is a victory for the Democrats because they never should have expected one or counted on one this election cycle. And yet they're doing it. And what they're doing is moving states such as Pennsylvania back into the Democratic column. Even when everything else seems to be pitted against them, the generic ballot, whatever it might be, nothing seems to be reminding us of 2018 or 2020. And yet somehow, the Democratic Party is doing very well when it comes down to individual races, especially these close and competitive governorships, where in the majority of them, the Democrats are up, and Pennsylvania is no different. With a lot of new data out of the state, I'm excited to see what the final margin of victory for Josh Shapiro actually is this November. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe I'm overestimating Josh Shapiro's margin of support. But a lot of these numbers were spot on in 2018, 2016, right in 2020, or overestimated the GOP on one hand in 2020. And altogether, they are finding that Democrats are ahead by double digits in all but 2 polls of the most recent 6. And of those 2, they weren't exactly the most accurate back in 2020. So you have to take that into consideration as well. So we'll see what happens. Josh Shapiro, Doug Mastriano in an extremely interesting Pennsylvania race, but I can't necessarily say an extremely competitive race as it might have been just a few months ago. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 governor election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.